Hey guys, with another one-take review, and today I want to talk about the Bobby Hutcherson album, Dialogue. Dialogue is kind of a dream album for a lot of jazz geeks like myself. I mean, besides the fact that it has amazing performances and that Hutcherson himself walks a very thin line between cult favorite and general jazz icon, this record also has a lineup of musicians that in retrospect is kind of amazing, even in 1965. However, first things first, Hutcherson himself is a very interesting individual in the history of jazz, and he's also one of my favorites to talk about as well. While not totally unheard of or the most exotic instruments that you'll ever hear in jazz, the vibraphone and the marimba aren't the typical tools of the trade, and definitely not the first instruments you think of when you think of jazz. Nonetheless, Hutcherson makes himself incredibly present and prominent throughout dialogue, even with his odd choice of instruments. From the second that dialogue begins, the unusualness of his choice in percussion puts him at the forefront, and so much so that he actually has to take breaks to allow his other musicians to shine a little bit more. Considering this is an album that is just filled to the brim with legendary jazz performers in the making, it's a very impressive feat. And I would also like to add the fact that while many do consider Dialogue to be the peak of Bobby Hutcherson's career, I would also say that the best aspect of Dialogue is also Bobby Hutcherson. Now, I know a lot of people may be watching this and have heard me say that and are saying, yeah, Zane, of course it is, it's his album, of course he's the best aspect about it. But let me just say this. There are a lot of jazz albums, even by the legends, Davis and Coltrane and Evans, etc., that are fantastic and considered classics, but without sidemen would not be classics. If you look at an album like The Shape of Jazz to Come by Ornette Coleman, yeah, Coleman is an intense, legendary performer who really makes that album. But what about all of the other individuals on that record that kind of define its sound just as much as Coleman does? My point is there are a lot of classic albums that wouldn't be classics without other performers besides who's being directly credited on the album. I think Dialogue's an exception of that. I firmly believe that Bobby Hutcherson is the reason this album is really fantastic. Without him, it would still be good. It would still be a good, very solid jazz album, but it is because of him that it goes from good to great. Anyways, I digress. As I said at the beginning of this review, this lineup of musicians is really amazing in a retrospective sense. Even though nobody would know this circa 1965 when this record came out, the band that performs on Dialogue is seriously just packed with legendary musicians that we definitely look back on and kind of praises some of the greats. Perhaps the most iconic here is trumpet player Freddie Hubbard, who, besides releasing a variety of classics in his own time, like Ready for Freddie, also played with some legends themselves, like Coltrane and even Sonny Rollins. The experience that you might expect from performing with artists like those, who are, again, also icons of jazz, definitely shows here as Hubbard manages to take the record and create a very cool, collected performance that definitely drags Dialogue in a very atmospheric direction. Also featured on Dialogue are bassist Richard Davis as well as saxophonist Sam Rivers. Both Rivers and Davis have had a variety of classics under their belt over their career and especially were in their prime at this point in history. However, some of their best work is found on Dialogue, especially in those moments where they manage to find a very tense atmospheric sound before swinging into more intense pieces that immediately draw the listener in with their appropriately timed and incredibly well executed improvisation. Drummer Joe Chambers as well as pianist Andrew Hill also appear on Dialogue as well, two names that will probably be familiar with jazz fans. Both deliver some of the best work of their career as sidemen, even though you could definitely argue that Hill's performance here doesn't exactly match what he would do as a solo artist, but I suppose that's a given considering Hill is another amazing solo artist who released a variety of fantastic albums. Hill particularly has an interesting sense of melody here as he knows how to perfect melody itself while also knowing exactly when to explode into random chaos when he needs to. More importantly, however, is the non-performance work of Chambers and Hill. The two are collectively responsible for composing the entirety of Dialogue, with Chambers delivering songs like Idle While, and Hill bringing on songs like Ghetto Lights. Although this record was technically brought together by two different composers, they may as well have been the same person, as anxious and atmospheric is definitely the constant name of this record's game. While purposefully anxious and semi-abstract jazz is definitely a trope that was overdone even in 1965, there's no denying how impassioned the performances as well as the compositions here are, as well as how well thought out those compositions are, that it's hard not to place this on a pedestal above similar albums that try to do similar things, make a similar atmosphere, but to lesser success. Overall, Dialogue is a fantastic listen that really demonstrates the jazz abilities of six masters of the genre. Whether you want complex yet passionately performed compositions, or you just want Bobby Hutcherson's masterclass in the jazz vibraphone, I think that Dialogue is an album that should genuinely be on every jazz fan's radar. If you haven't heard it, I highly recommend listening to it as soon as possible. I find it to be one of the most absolutely essential listens of the genre. It's a fantastic record, which is why I'm going to have to give it 4.5 stars out of 5. The constant atmosphere that's being built here alongside intense performances, and just the fact that you get to hear Hill, Chambers, Rivers, and Hutcherson all on the same album with Freddie Hubbard as well is kind of an incredible thing as well. And I just think this is an fantastic album overall that I really recommend. So 4.5 stars out of 5. With that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.